Welcome to Beyond the Transaction with hosts Jim Clifford and Sarah Perkins. Get ready to hear conversations with Arizona business leaders and decision makers as they discuss the real estate industry, economic forecasts, and community development initiatives. Brought to you by Clear Title Agency of Arizona.
All right. Welcome to the very first episode of Beyond the Transaction. I am not Jim Clifford. I'm actually Dane Briggs filling in for Jim Clifford, and I'm here today with Sarah Perkins, and we are so excited to start the first episode of what's going to be many podcasts to come, giving you some insights into what's happening beyond the transaction here in the real estate industry in Arizona. Sarah, welcome. Thanks so much for being a co-host.
Thanks so much for putting this together. I'm really excited to be here.
We are going to have a ton of fun on this podcast, and we've got a great initial podcast episode today. We've got a fantastic guest that's going to be on talking all things about the market and the industry. But, you know, like I said, my name's Dane Briggs. I'm not Jim Clifford. Jim, sadly, was not able to be here today for this first podcast. But, you know, we're going to miss him, and he's going to be back for the next podcast.
Can't wait to have our next one with Jim here. It'll be fun. And Dane, you're still a wonderful guest, though, or host.
Well, thank you. We're going to be talking about the real estate transaction, things going on in the marketplace, what's going on with businesses that are around the real estate transaction, and also what's going on in the marketplace, what's going on in the industry out there, what's happening in different municipalities, what's happening with different laws, just everything anybody who really cares about real estate in the Arizona market would want to know. And we're going to have a lot of awesome information to come for you. So I'm really excited. It's going to be wonderful. And I actually think we have a caller calling in for our first episode. Megan, our producer, Megan, can you go ahead and patch that first caller through?
Can you hear me?
We sure can. It is Jim Clifford calling in.
I had a great line. It was going to be long time listener, first time caller, love the show kind of thing. But hi guys.
Hey, Jim. I think you are a longtime listener. Let's be honest.
I'm calling in for a brief hello, some virtual hugs, and then a quick goodbye. I unfortunately am not able to be there for the first episode. Are you kidding me? The first episode. No, I'm not golfing or fishing. I'm at home comfortably quarantining because of the COVID. I know, terrible. I've gone 2.5 years. And you know what? The second I started bragging about being one of very few people that I know that don't have the COVID, boom, I get the COVID.
Isn't that how it always happens?
That's what I'm coming to find out. So I'm very disappointed I couldn't be there with you guys, with Sarah, with Dane, and our illustrious, mysterious first guest. I wish you well. I wish you good luck on the inaugural show. Thanks for allowing me to at least call in and be a part of it. And let's have some fun, guys. What do you think?
I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
It's going to be a lot of fun.
It already is.
It already is. Yep. We'll get into some off-color jokes and some questionably appropriate material, when for the next edition of the Clear Title podcast. But I wish I could be there. Thanks for covering for me, Dane.
Absolutely.
And, don't forget to thank the people behind the glass before you sign off. Good luck on the first show.
Thank you, sir. And I appreciate you extending the golden microphone to me to be able to host this first one. But we're excited for you to come back for the next one.
Dane, my golden microphone is your golden microphone. Anytime, my friend.
All right. Well,
and all right. Do a great job. Have lots of fun. Thanks for having me on. And Sarah,
yes,
pull on the leash every so often because you know how Dane can get running on.
Definitely. I'll keep them under control.
Okay. All right, guys. Thanks, guys. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Jim.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Well, we're going to get into the episode now because I'm sure everybody's dying to hear. And, Sarah and I, before the show, we actually were challenging each other on who got to introduce our guest, because the question was who actually knew our guest longer. And while I wish it was me, and I have lots of great stories about how the guest and I first met, I have to defer to you, Sarah, because you've actually known the guest longer than I have.
Yes, I have. Because we were in the same sorority, fortunately. When I moved to Arizona, I found her 18 and a half years ago. And she is the one that got me into title, as she hired me as her assistant on an interview that I didn't know was an interview because she told me it was an interview, but it was definitely an interview. So I worked for her for 2.5 years, and I'm still in title, and she has moved on to other pastures and become our biggest celebrity in town.
Well, don't keep everyone waiting. Who is it?
We're so excited to have you here. Tina Tamboer is an amazing person, was an incredible boss, by the way, and she knows everything about what's going on in our local real estate market.
Oh, thank you. I love the canned applause. We need to get that on Zoom more often.
The canned applause?
Yeah, it's great. I need to just hit it.
That and the chuckle. Hey, that was a joke.
Yeah, that was a joke. That was the part where you're supposed to laugh. Yeah. Right on. This is going to be great.
It is going to be great. And, I'm sure most of the people listening out here have probably heard one of Tina's Cromford Report market updates that she does. She does them all over the valley for lots of different companies. It's probably what's keeping you busy most of the time, are those market updates. But, one of the things I love is both Sarah and I have sat down and had a lot of conversations with you, Tina, kind of off the record about what's going on in the real estate industry. Those market update reports, we really try and dive into a lot of the specific details of what's going on with the numbers and those types of things. But what I really love is just the conversations we have at lunch and things like that, of sitting around and kind of pontificating about what's happening and what does that golden, that glass globe of prediction and all that we never want to say out there. But it's some of my favorite conversations because the industry is interesting. It's one of those things that to me, when we are in times like this where we're seeing a shift, it's a lot more exciting. There's a lot more going on. I know the same for you. I know Sarah also. So we're thrilled to have you here today. And, if there is anyone out there listening that hasn't seen one of Tina's market updates, make sure you tune into one of those. They're hosted all over the valley. We host one on the first or the second Wednesday of every single month. And you absolutely can join us for that. But, if somebody hasn't done that, Tina, go ahead and, what's some of your background? What do you do? And
oh, gosh. So my background is I came in from title. So right out of college in 1993, I moved out here and I got a job in title. And I was just doing data entry. And for about 7 years, that emerged into database programming. And because it's so valley specific, I was just here in Phoenix. I got kind of that early on experience of the seasonality of the market, how the real estate agents and all of the industries surrounding real estate kind of work, if you will. And then I got into title insurance sales, and I did that for about 10 years. That's where I met Sarah. And then I got back into my analytics side of things in 2011, which was literally the bottom of the market at the height of our foreclosure crisis. And I started getting back to my analytical roots with Michael Orr, the Cromford Report. And that's where I met you, Dane.
That is.
Yeah.
It's been over 10 years now.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I can't even believe it. And so I always say I've been an analyst first, but the real estate industry gave me a personality. So between being able to look at what the numbers say, but then also be able to say this is what you'll probably be experiencing as these numbers change, has really helped, because it's most analysts don't have the experience, like the emotional side of how people feel when numbers start going up and down or things get just volatile in the marketplace.
Well, and I think volatility is definitely the key word that we're seeing right now. Yeah. The market in the last few months has been crazy, and what's amazing is we've been doing market updates with you now for well over a year. I know we started it kind of when COVID hit, and we were talking about that. And I know for a lot of agents, they want the statistics and they want the numbers when things change, when things are kind of the same old every single day.
Oh, yeah.
It's not as interesting. But when we see that volatility, it really makes people kind of pay attention. And,
Right.
I think for the average real estate agent, they need to know those numbers.
Yeah, it's during times of uncertainty, people want to know what's certain. And during times that things are pretty consistent or they have been consistent over a number of years, they're like, oh, I can catch Tina like once a quarter and I'm fine. Well, now when interest rates are doing what they're doing, when the market's shifting the way it is, like now it's more like once a week, and then when it settles down, it'll probably go down to once a month, and then it'll probably go down to once a quarter again, and then I'm going to take a nice long vacation. And it'll be going back to being Galadriel.
I don't know if that's actually going to happen. Just with the way the market has been speeding up, I don't know that it's going to slow down at least anything that we ever used to see.
Well, we're just talking stabilization. So nothing in real estate, as we know. I mean, for those of us, and I know you, the people in this on this podcast, you have been around a long time. You've seen a lot of ups and downs. Nothing is forever in real estate. There's usually something that, shifts or disrupts or whatever. And but what's interesting to me is that as much as things change, they stay the same. And tools that we used back in the 90s, we're like, oh, I guess we're going to pull that on out again. Because this industry is one of the most creative, responsive industries I know because of its entire makeup being a bunch of squirrels out there, right? Everybody running their own business. Everybody's looking to solve a problem. And when one person solves it, guess what? They all go in and they solve it. And they start feeding off of each other and solving things. And so I find that this industry is so incredibly interesting to me compared to like corporate world. I'm not sure I'm even hireable anymore. That is sinister. So anyhow, but yeah, so what are you seeing in title that, you think is really interesting? Because there's a lot of things that we see in numbers, but we don't actually know like what's underneath it. So I might know that there's concessions, but I won't know things like escrow fallouts, or I won't know about like what type of concessions you're seeing.
It's interesting because what we saw kind of right at the start of this market shift a few months ago was a drastic increase in the cancellations. Things would go under contract, and then I think buyers probably had a little bit of buyer's remorse maybe, and that little fear, and so there were a lot of things that would cancel during inspection periods. And all of that. We've actually seen that cancellation rate kind of return a little bit back to normal, though. Are you seeing that in a lot of your numbers also?
Yeah, we're not seeing any big spikes in what we call back on markets. For you, it would be an escrow cancellation. For us, it'll be back on market. We saw a little spike in June, but that was corresponding with a boost in interest rates. When interest rates went from like 5.2 to 5.8 on average, according to Freddie Mac, we saw cancellations drop, shoot up a little bit, not spike, not like COVID kind of, panicked, but a lot of them, you would think they would have been from the buyers. Some of them were, but a lot of them were from institutional buyers. The institutional buyers got spooked a little bit more. And so what I find is interesting and surprising about emotions in real estate is that oftentimes when we say real estate's emotional and emotional buyers, we are thinking that the emotional buyer is your traditional owner-occupant, and it isn't. It's actually your Wall Street buyer is way more emotional and way more reactive than your traditional regular homeowner, because normal homeowners or first-time home buyers or whatever, they have in their mind, a steady job. They are looking for a 30-year fixed mortgage. They can either afford it or they can't. And they are typically long-term. And Wall Street, because they're not spending their own money, they can take it or leave it, right? They're all about the profit. So if they feel that the market, like the interest rates or whatever they think, if they believe that they are in control of the market, if they pull back and they can control prices coming down or something like that, you might see them try to manipulate the market in a way. And I think we did see some of that from May.
And I mean, that's such an interesting topic of the manipulation of the marketplace.
Yeah.
And it's something that, I don't think I think it'd be hard to say that there's hard evidence that we've seen some of these institutional buyers playing those games, but I think there probably just is some ancillary evidence that they've pushed a little bit of the market in a direction or another. I mean, are you seeing much of that in the numbers?
I would say that some of that information is things that I hear. So you've got the gossip of the industry, of the underlying feeling, and then you have what's in the numbers. So the numbers tell us, yes, they've canceled, but the thing is, it's like they're not canceling because all of a sudden their interest rates went up. They were cash. So why else would they cancel? You know, if they didn't believe that in some way that prices would come down. And if they're not going to be selling to another person, they're holding long-term hold, then why would they do that? I could see a flip investor pulling out because they're unsure if they can actually sell it to somebody else on the back end and make money on it, like as much as they need. So you did see, and this is, some of it's in our numbers, some of it's not, but we did hear reports of flip investors who were renegotiating their price towards the end of closing escrow because they realized that the market had shifted during the time frame that they were actually in escrow and they weren't going to be able to close it.
The shift to me has always been one of the most exciting times because what you end up with, what we had over the last few years was, okay, it was pretty easy to figure out how to make money, you know, especially let's take the flippers that were out there. That became a very easy thing. You could buy almost any home. You could put a lot of work or almost no work into it. With appreciation going up, you were probably going to be able to sell that home for more money 3 to 6 months down the road. It was a fairly easy game for people to play. Well, now it's gotten a lot more difficult for them.
Yeah, I know. Now it's like, this is where professionals are made now, right?
And I think, you know, the ones that are the professionals are still doing it and doing it very well. And a lot of the numbers that you've shared show that, you know, especially seeing that those investors, not the what we call iBuyers and those types of ones out there, but your traditional flip investors still seem to get more profit than the institutional investors do.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I believe that that's because, this is my personal feeling, is that that's because those people are spending their own money. And they spend their own money a little bit differently than they spend someone else's? Yeah, they're spending their own money, and they tend to have intimate knowledge of the markets that they're in. And corporations tend to hire people who have to oblige a manager and follow directives coming from above them. And corporations tend to, in my opinion, move slower in response to a market shift than an individual flip investor would be who's on their own.
Definitely.
Well, and the fact is that over the last year, as affordability has dropped below our traditional levels, that traditional owner-occupier has been pushed out. And so most of the risk that's being taken on today is from investors. They are the ones who have been purchasing, for the most part, more so than normal. And in the second quarter of this year, 26% were investor or iBuyer transactions on the buy side. So, and only 62% were owner-occupant. So with that, you know, pushing out of the normal owner-occupier and then this influence of investor, that's who's been pushing prices up, and that entity is who's taking on most of the risk. And the big difference between this market and prior to the crash is that these investors are not getting 100% financing from lenders. They are spending their own money and taking on their own risk, and they will pay the price. And the rest of us will just watch.
It's definitely going to be interesting to see how that all shakes out with the differences. You know, I think there are clear differences from what we saw in 06, 07, 08 leading up to the Great Recession. And I think for all intents and purposes, it's a different market now than it was back then. But I do think we're going to see that volatility really makes emotions run high. And it's interesting to see what happens with buyers, with sellers, and the investors that are out there, but even the traditional marketplace. And I think a big difference today than what we had back then was social media. You know, back in 07, 08, the information was slow to come out.
That's true. It makes me wonder what they would have been saying in 05, 06, and 08. I doubt they would have been talking about a bubble because we hadn't had one. Yeah. We
hadn't, yeah. They wouldn't have related it to the SNL crisis of the late 80s, early 90s. Yeah. And
they'll be like, that's basically, if you look at the headlines from 2005, all of them are like, this is going to go on forever. And that's the one thing about emotions, that people feel that whatever you're in is going to go on forever. Like if it's going up, it's going to go up forever. If it's going to go down, it's going to go down forever. And without realizing, like, well, nothing really happens forever. Like this is a time in our period. That's why housing has always been recommended as a long-term hold, as a hedge for those ups and downs that we occasionally get. And when I say occasionally, I really mean it, because of the last 20 years, we've only had 2 buyer markets and 1 balanced market. So the rest of it's been a seller market for us. A couple of good news pieces you might like from the last week is our interest rates came down. According to Freddie Mac, they kissed just below 5% for like 1 week. The average was 4.99%.
Woohoo!
I know, yeah. And then it bumped back up to 5.2. But in that time frame, we actually saw a little, I wouldn't say a huge spike, but we saw a definite recovery week in terms of, after seeing the number of accepted contracts decline since June. You know, when June went from 5.02 to 5.8 and then back down to 5.2 and all that craziness, we saw the number of accepted contracts really coming down at a pretty, disappointing rate. I wouldn't say it's catastrophic. It was just like, well, this is low. It's not a crisis, but it's not optimal as well. So to see that recovery meant that the buyers are still there. They're not gone. That was actually very uplifting, and it gave us kind of a spot where we felt like, where I felt like, oh, so if we go down to 5%, guess what happens to our demand? Because it happened right there, right? So it gave me this little beacon of hope, if you will. But at the same time, what we saw was the median price came down from May to August to date is down about 4%. But your payment went down over 5%. So payments came down like $168 a month for a 1,500 to 2,000 square foot home, which is our bread and butter here. And so for somebody to be able to go out and say, hey, listen, payments, your estimated payment for your bread and butter basic home right now is actually coming down more than the prices are coming down. That creates as well some hope for people that the buyers are there. They just literally are just below the surface, just an inch away from buying.
Well, when you've had prices like this do what they've done for the last 2.5 years and the struggle they've had to get in, it's nice knowing that it can go to a 4.99 to get that, because we were kind of, a lot of people just guessing of thinking, what's it going to be? Is it going to be 4.5? That is, what opens those doors. So if it's 4.99.
But of course, what my analyst friends, Tom Ruff and Mike Orr, would tell me is like, Tina, that's 1 week. We need at least 2 for a trend. So it's not a trend yet. It was just like,
it's just a glimmer.
It was a glimmer. And I'm like, well, if this is what happens when I go on vacation, I'm going to go on vacation more often because.
Like next week again?
Yeah. I'm going to have another, maybe next week. I'll just go silent, see if it happens.
2 weeks in a row, we get our trend.
I can tell you what supply should normally be this time of month. So like say August, we should be between 20 and 25,000 listings. We're at 17,000. However, we are in balance. It's not because we're at 17,000. It's because we are also 20% below normal for demand. So to have, I can tell you what demand is normally. We should have about 9,000, and we only have 9 in escrow waiting to close. We only have 7,600. So there's normal supply for the time of year. And then there's a balance between the two, supply and demand. So I think that's probably one of the most confusing analytics.
That people really should be looking at all of those numbers and how they relate to each other, not just a single statistic that they're able to pull out that this one stat is up X percent or down Y percent.
Right.
Because that could be immaterial.
Exactly. Once we get to 20,000, we're all going to be balanced. Not necessarily.
I read once that when people were talking about like even calling it the national market versus, what's going on, somebody said it's the national market is a market of markets. So even as you look at it, it's always, well, what is this one doing? Or what about, over here? Because they're different. Because I know you've said that the luxury market's still doing pretty well. Is that still the case?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, the Northeast Valley cities are the top seller markets in the Valley right now. Even though they have come down quite a bit, their demand is mostly in a summer lull. So whereas other parts of the country will speed up during the spring and summer, we slow down. So we have a bit of an inverse relationship to summer than the rest of the country does, right? So they are actually seeing that slowdown, and their supply has actually gone up. But we are still seeing historically high levels of contracts over $1 million waiting to close. Like 686 was the last number I saw. And back in 2000, yeah. But because we have 1,800 listings, it looks like, it's really cooled off because we didn't have that many listings, 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of, again, that relationship between supply and demand when they're both moving all the time is enough to make some people's heads explode. And that's why we use the contract ratios to give them a visual of how that affects sellers.
What do you think is going to happen with the number of transactions on a monthly basis over the next few months and going into the end of the year?
It's always difficult to do number predictions. In fact, I have a bet going on with an agent right now and on supply. And every time supply goes up, by 1,000, and he's like texting me, "Oh, looks like we're going up." Anyway. So, when you're coming into like actual numbers, it's always a very difficult, it's a difficult prediction to make. And as you guys know, we don't like to do predictions because I don't like to be wrong. So nobody wants to be wrong and put themselves out there on podcast. That's why we keep it for our lunches, Dane. We like to predict during lunch in the privacy of our own little circles.
When you can be wrong and nobody will remember.
That's right. And then in these circumstances, people ask you and we're like, I don't know. So I'll just tell you what I feel is reasonable to expect. And again, I hear this a lot on social media. Tina predicted blah, blah, blah. I don't predict anything, people. Nothing. But I have reasonable expectations. Okay. So, and if interest rates go up, all bets are off.
Yep. I think
if interest rates go down, all bets are off, right? If we stay stable at where we are, like in the low fives, and these interest rate buy downs become more understandable and utilized in terms of helping buyers out with their payments. And when I say that, I mean, it's one of the seller tools that is available for people who are payment conscious. And as some of these tools come back out, my hope is that between now and the end of the year, we will stay stable in the number of closings. I don't have any big bold dreams that we're going to increase, like when Open Door and Zillow decided to have Clash of the Titans in the latter half of 2021, and all of a sudden all of our sales went through the roof. I'm not expecting anything like that. I think I'd be really happy just to see a stabilize between now and the end of December before we drop off like we always do at the end of the year.
Speaking of rate buy downs, Sarah, you put together a really cool flyer that kind of explains rate buy downs and how it can impact the buyers and the payment that they have and how it can be really beneficial for sellers. Where can agents find that if they want to be able to access it?
So if they go to my website at theazmarket.com, there's a marketing tab, and it'll be right there. You can just click it and download it. And I got to say thank you to Tina Tamboer for putting the data together for us.
And Tina, what are you seeing with rate buy downs just in terms of, I guess the basis of it is that it's lowering the payment for the borrower more so than it would if they just did a price reduction of that same amount?
Well, there's a couple of things. Now, mind you, I'm not a lender, so I'm always talk to your lender. But from what I understand of the program, the buyer still has to qualify at the higher interest rate. This is an offering that sellers can do, especially for payment-conscious buyers, where the seller is like, well, if I'm going to do a $15,000 price reduction, Mr. Buyer, would you rather you have your $15,000 here now, or would you like me to supplement your payment for 2 years? Essentially is what it is. It's a supplementation. But the buyer still has to qualify at the higher interest rate because after 2 years, you're going back to the original payment. And so, of course, regulations require that lenders ensure that those buyers can afford their payments over time.
Another difference from where we were in 2008.
Right, I know.
Awesome. Well, yeah, so agents can get that at theazmarket.com/marketing, or they can just visit theazmarket.com and click on the marketing tab.
That's it.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. I've always been surprised at the number of agents that don't subscribe to the Cromford Report. And I think a lot of them probably don't understand, one, exactly what it is, or how to use it or anything like that. But for an agent that might be listening to this and has never subscribed to the Cromford Report, give a quick synopsis of what it is and why you think it's so important. Because I have always believed it's one of the most important tools available to an agent. Back when I was selling real estate, it was my go-to thing that I looked at every single day. And it's hard for me to fathom how an agent could do their job without looking at it on a regular basis and having access. But it is something that is subscription-based. It's an extra thing that agents can buy. And I know that every agent out there is looking at, their monthly expenses and figuring out what should we spend money on and what should we not. But I've always believed Cromford Report is one of those things that is worth their money. And I want to give you the opportunity to just maybe tell an agent that hasn't ever logged into it of why they should.
Well, I think that I've often stated before, we don't sell stats, we sell confidence. And if you're any salesperson going into any home, any person's home, you have to have confidence that if you have a question from that seller that you can answer it. And especially if you yourself are feeling insecure about the marketplace, how are you going to then sell a seller or a buyer on the marketplace, right? So again, we provide an avenue for people to lean into what they know. So for instance, we have reports that you can pull by zip code and by price point and by size range and all of that stuff to let a seller know, like, you know what, this is how many contracts are being written in your area and your price point every week. This is how many days on market those properties were on the market, so you can set expectations with your seller. And this is where their average dollar per square foot at contract those listings were. So, here's where the market is. This is your CMA for your area. Your area is overperforming or underperforming compared to this market. And get the seller enough information to make decisions on how aggressive or competitive they want to be at the onset. But the good news is that you don't have to bombard your sellers and buyers with charts all the time. You don't need to do an hour and a half market update like I do. You just need to let them know that when you make a recommendation, you've already looked at those charts. So their trust, you're building trust with your client. And then that's what I believe that we do. So even for an agent who's not a statistical person, I love the agents to tell me that they're no good at math. I'm like, really? What's 3% of 545,000?
And they know exactly.
They will know exactly how much that. So there's no realtor that's bad at math. Okay, they can calculate. So basically, even if you don't feel that you are statistically oriented, you can give the report to somebody who is, and they'll understand it. And if you give it to somebody who isn't, they're just happy you looked at it.
The Cromford Report is available only to Arizona Regional MLS subscribers, so agents that are part of...
Yes, specifically real estate agent members of the Arizona Regional MLS, and that's because we have a data license that is restricts our permissions to sell to anybody other than their members, which makes complete sense to us, because if you're a member and you pay to put your money in, you pay to put your listings in there, then the benefits of that should come back to you. Absolutely.
And I think that's a great thing for agents, to be able to have access to that data, because it is kind of their data in the sense of what they've fed the MLS with. And so, any agent out there that's a member of the Arizona Regional MLS can go to cromfordreport.com. They can sign up there. You guys have a monthly, quarterly, or annual option. Is that right?
We do. Yeah. So it's $35 a month, but if you go quarterly, it's $60. It saves you, $90. It saves you $60 a year. And an annual is $300 a month, which saves you $100 and $120 off of the...
$300 a year, not $300 a month.
Oh, did I say $300 a month? I'm sorry, $300 a year.
That's the more expensive package that gives you the crystal ball.
That is for my special friends. No.
But $300
$300 a year saves you $120 a year off of the monthly rate.
Awesome. Well, I think every agent should definitely subscribe to it. Tina, thank you for coming on. We're going to have you on this podcast every now and then to kind of come in and opine on what's going on and what you think, a little bit different than our normal market update where we go over the hard stats of the different things. But thank you so much for coming in for our inaugural Beyond the Transaction podcast today.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Tina.
Awesome. Now, Sarah, you and Jim have a ton of great episodes coming up. But what's some of the stuff that people listening are going to see in upcoming episodes, and why should they click the follow button on this podcast so they get notified of every new Beyond the Transaction podcast?
I'd like to just say, because we're endlessly interesting, but we're also going to have some really great speakers, including mayors for the different cities that are coming around, some of the city development people, where, water, electric, what's going on that is impacting homeowners that live here in the Valley, things that are going on with national trends, and, even talking to agents, investors, things like that. Whatever's going to, whatever's happening in the market, we want to talk to the movers and shakers that are seeing it and promoting the policy that is happening and our market's adjusting to.
Awesome. And Beyond the Transaction is going to be available on all of your favorite podcast streaming platforms, whether it's Spotify, iTunes, all of the different ones out there. So you'll be able to subscribe and follow. And we are looking forward to bringing you up-to-date information to help keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on beyond the transaction. And so this has been our first inaugural episode. Tina, thank you so much for coming in today and joining us. Here at Clear Title, we're always interested in making sure agents, lenders, everybody has the information that they need to stay up to date with the marketplace, and we want to handle those escrows for you. So if you're an agent out there and you are putting a home under contract this weekend, go ahead and put Clear Title on that contract. Give us a shot. We want to show you why we believe we are the best escrow company here in the Valley. We've been around for a long time. We've got a lot of experience, and we love taking care of the transaction. And if we do a transaction for you, then we can talk more about what happens beyond the transaction. So thank you very much, Sarah and Tina. I appreciate it. It was a absolute blast having you on the first episode.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
All right. Tune in next time. Make sure you subscribe and follow, and we will keep giving you up-to-date real estate information.